Welcome to another episode of Teach Me Outbound. This week we've got Neicho from Salesloft. If you want to do a very quick intro, Jack, we can jump right into it.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Joe. Quick intro. My name's Neicho. I'm an account executive, as you said, at Salesloft. I was one of our first sales hires here 4 years ago. I was an SDR before that and have made thousands of cold calls, sent thousands of prospecting emails, LinkedIn connections. One of the first users of Vidyard in Europe in 2019. So I had a lot of success with that, and try and find other inventive ways to try and schedule meetings. So hopefully I can share some wisdom and advice with you.
Awesome. Yeah. And the reason I wanted to get you on is we've had you on the main podcast before, and people were just loving the advice. Like you said, you've always been someone who is into testing, first one using Vidyard in Europe, which is a good flex, seeing how popular it is now. So, just going into what you mentioned before the last podcast, and you said how important it is for A's to be prospecting. Some people still don't agree with it, but how's that? Are you still in that flow? How's the year been in terms of self-sourced ops versus SDR sourced ops?
Yeah, really interesting. And actually, I went and dug in a little bit deeper. We have a really good inbound motion here at Salesloft. But when I actually looked at the 20 largest deals I've ever signed as an account executive at Salesloft, 19 of those 20 have either been self sourced or by an SDR. So it just goes to show you when you're doing outbound, you can be so much more targeted, obviously, because you're the one choosing the net, so to say, on the companies that you're targeting, on your real ICP with the organizations that ultimately are going to drive a higher average order value for your company. Even in that, of all of the six-figure deals that I've closed, every single one of them, bar one, has been self-sourced as well, where I'm going out and delivering, highly personalized messaging to the top tier of my accounts in my list in Salesforce.
Amazing. It's obviously working, right? And I guess some A's, when they ask they're doing their own prospecting, it comes down to time. That's a reason they're not doing it. With a lot of SDRs, they go through an exercise of saying, this is my number, this is exactly how many calls and emails and voice notes and everything I need to do in a day. And it becomes very formulaic, right? Whereas as an AE, you don't have the same amount of time. You maybe have an hour a day in between meetings when you just need to do a bit of that. So do you have a similar setup in terms of daily activity? How do you balance it with the rest of the role?
Yeah, that's a really good idea. I think that it all comes down with prioritizing contacting the right people in the right accounts at the right time, which is sometimes hard to do if you don't have the software there to help you. Um, But the things that I would be looking for are following up your closed lost opportunities, finding accounts that have recently released funding on Crunchbase, looking at things like user gem reports. So if you are lucky enough to have software where you get insights into when champions are moving around companies. Something that we are good at Salesloft is going on LinkedIn Sales Navigator, uploading a list on of your accounts on Salesforce onto LinkedIn Sales Navigator, and then looking for things like team link introductions, people in those accounts that follow your company have posted in the last 90 days. So generally when I have that hour or an hour and a half a day of prospecting time, sometimes it's not even that. I could go to like Friday and my calendar is just like fully booked with meetings and it ends up being a Friday afternoon. You're looking for things that like weighs in with the evolution of sales development this year, it's become harder and harder to do cold outbound prospecting. And generally, with like predictive growth, SaaS businesses have just, some of them, won't name any names, have just spammed the market with email automating platforms that have just mass emailed. And with the recent announcement from Google and Yahoo, like Salesloft have been predicting this for so on how many months. Hence why we released Rhythm AI earlier this year, where we're allowing companies to now integrate all of those platforms that I've just talked about, Crunchbase, User Gems, whatever it is, the Zoom Info, into cadences. So, you can push contacts to the right cadences based on those intents, and you're not just doing sort of blunt cold outreach.
Nice. A lot to go into in a bit more detail there, but just starting with the closed lost ops, as you said, and that's something you mentioned on the previous podcast as well. In terms of like actually approaching it on a more tactical side, what does your flow look like? Is there sort of a set time you'll leave a closed lost op, or are you sort of always keeping in touch with them? What would you recommend someone to actually do to make better use of that?
Yeah, that's a good idea. Let me go and find my one now, and I can actually tell you how mine looks. Bear
Awesome.
with me. But in theory, I actually leave 29, I think 29 working days. It's actually 30 days. And what I'll do at that 30-day point, so that's be a 30 days since I closed, lost the opportunity, where that contact will be then auto enrolled into a cadence or sequence of mine, where the first touch point on 30 days is for me to write my notes that I will then refer back to when this contact is on the cadence as to why I lost the opportunity. Now, that might not necessarily, most of the time, it's going to be to the status quo. So, was it pricing? Was it features? Was it timing? Like, what actually happened that I can then refer back to? And to add any collateral that I used during the evaluation, be that business case, challenges that they were going after, key criteria. And then I'll personalize based on that persona. Once I've completed that research step, I'll write a personalized email checking in with them, like going over why they closed lost and probably asking if it's a better time to pick up conversations. It's all really dependent on, the conversation that you had. That's why it needs to be unautomated. But then basically, Joe, that contact goes down into a cadence that's 300 days long, which involves emails, LinkedIn touch points, phone calls, all of which have an action that I want to do on those specific time periods. Most of these happen, so it goes day 30, day 60, day 90. It's like every to 3 months. And I actually have another cadence outside of that, which is just a 3 month nurture on really specific things that Salesloft helps with. That I'll also sometimes add in maybe more junior stakeholders that I've had on the deal, which is like, oh, hey, here's like something about cadences, or here's a cool blog post that I found, or here's, relevant content to do with sales development.
Nice. And so with the 300-day cadence, how did you go around improving that? Because obviously it takes time to gather the data on what's working and what isn't. Like, do you have any advice on how to actually build something like that out, which is quite a complex nurture, I guess, right, compared to, like you said, a quite simple but short, intensive one, which you're getting a lot of feedback very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think honestly, you just need to sit down, and I always instruct this with customers. No sales rep on their own should be building the cadences. Like, that is a team cadence that we use as an account executive team across the Europe and North America when we target customers. Like, ultimately, you want as much data as possible flowing through these cadences so you can understand, are these the right touch points in frequency in order for us to generate opportunities from. And of course, because these are unautomated, each email that you write is going to be different. But what you're looking for is this frequent enough for us to generate opportunities from? Or do we need to elongate it even more? Or do we need to compress this cadence? But yeah, you're right. Like, it would be very hard to action a close loss campaign if you don't use some form of cadencing or sequencing platform, which I'm sure very few organizations do now. Well, fast growing SaaS businesses, like, it's a fairly commoditized product across quite a few competitors of mine. So I'm sure that someone used something. I know who Casper used.
Yeah, exactly. No, and I guess the other point in going back to your starting statement, so you mentioned that close loss is a big one, and then also just the not pure cold outbound, but that sort of warmer outreach, getting a referral, seeing like sort of intent on LinkedIn. With the referral piece, so maybe someone who's just joined a new company, do you have like any advice on how to make that first outreach what you see as quite a successful way of doing it? Are you very forward with it? How are you trying to build that relationship?
Interesting. I think, first of all, you want to try and connect with, but one starting tip, connect with every person in your company on LinkedIn, because that's
Okay.
going to be the only way that you're going to be able to see those team link introductions. And you will never find out how far fetched that connection would be. You know, I just had one with a colleague of mine who was like, "Oh, you're connected to this like person. Do you know them?" And they'll be like, "They were a mate of mine at uni." Great. You know, you don't need to be that necessarily involved in the, like, that was in an opportunity as well. In prospecting, it can have the same effect. Like, introductions are so powerful. The team link introductions are something you should look for. What I'll even do is I will say, for example, I'll see like a new CRO joining a company that might be a top tier account of mine. Sometimes it's an email from my senior leadership team to that senior leader is more resonated than me reaching out to them.
Yeah.
You know, the reason why we would want to speak is X, Y, and Z from an exec level. So there's introductions that you can do, which you find on LinkedIn with people that you might have in common. But also you can do like intros in theory by matching execs to execs, almost like a prospecting draft on behalf that are really successful as well.
I guess it sort of leads a bit into multi-threading, which some we've been talking about quite a lot, and just trying to build that connection across the business into multiple areas. I'm sure you've got your approach with this. Do you run with an SDR into accounts to do multi-threading, or is it something you like to take priority with on your own? How does it work with Salesloft?
Yeah, I would actually call it a different name. I feel like multi-threading is when you have an opportunity and you're trying to get in front of other stakeholders. I like to
Yeah.
call it above the line and below the line prospecting.
Okay.
So this is something that I would work with an SDR on. And what it would generally mean is when we go and sit down and have a one-to-one for 15 minutes about an account, we would look at the sort of top level execs that I can prospect into with a message, but also the SDR can go into the management level. Now, critically, one of the things that's been really working for me this year is messaging reps on LinkedIn and connecting with them, asking for contextual information about their business. You can hypothesize so much more successfully when you understand a high level overview about the tech stack that they're currently using, or in my case, that the reps are using, because they're going to be using my software that I'm selling, but also some challenges they may be facing. Like,
Mm.
hey, you know, okay, we're using actually X competitor of yours. I don't know about Salesloft. Like, immediately that bit of information allows me and the SDR to prospect into the account with the reasons why customers would potentially move away from, or how we would try and consolidate other pieces of software. Like, you're immediately more resonating rather than going in with a very high level, have you heard of cadences before? And then you actually end up looking a bit stupid because you've not done any research, you've not found out anything about them, and you're already contacting a prospect that uses software that you offer.
Nice.
And that process looks something very similar to this. It will be like, hey Joe, how are you? Wondering if you wanted to help a fellow sales rep out, and I'll put a little like emoji after that. Then, if they do reply, I'll give them like a paragraph, a few paragraphs, a few sentences about, you know, context that we have on them as an account, and then ask them for help to be like, is that right or wrong? And who would you recommend I reach out to? And I don't actually ask for a recommendation off them. I'll be like, I'm not going to ask for you, and I'm not going to mention anything that you say, but I just want you to confirm what we know or tell me I'm wrong. Most of the time, you want them to tell you you're wrong. People like telling you when you're wrong rather than when you're right. And then for them to go, actually, I wouldn't reach out to this person, reach out to that person. You'd be so surprised in the accounts, like when you're especially targeting big companies, who is at the top of the org chart, and actually differently, who owns the power. Sometimes the power people are the people to prospect into, not necessarily the people at the top of the org chart.